The woman sitting across from Luca Romano hadn't asked him how his trip had gone. She hadn't asked why he'd returned to Chicago 3 days earlier than expected. She hadn't even noticed the exhaustion behind his eyes. Her attention was fixed on the small black velvet box beside his hand. Is that what I think it is? Vanessa asked, smiling. Luca leaned back in his chair. Outside the enormous windows of his penthouse, the city glittered beneath them. 47 floors below, cars crawled through the streets like tiny streams of light. Inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Maybe, Luca said. Vanessa reached across the table. Then open it. Luca didn't move. Instead, he studied the woman he'd been seeing for almost 6 months. She was beautiful, elegant, perfectly dressed, and suddenly he realized he knew exactly what would happen next. How was my trip? He asked. Vanessa blinked. What? My trip. Oh. She gave a little laugh. Fine, I assume. You're here. I was gone 11 days. I know. You didn't ask me once how it went. Vanessa's smile disappeared. Luca, what's wrong with you tonight? He looked at the velvet box. Nothing. Then give me my present. Something inside him went cold. Luca opened the box. A diamond bracelet caught the light. Vanessa gasped. Oh my God. She immediately reached for it. It's beautiful. Luca watched her fasten it around her wrist. Then he asked quietly, Do you love me? Vanessa looked up. What kind of question is that? A simple one. Of course I do. Me? He paused. Or the life I give you. Vanessa stared at him for a second. Then she smiled. I love our life. That wasn't the answer he'd asked for. But it was the answer he needed, because Luca Romano had spent most of his adult life surrounded by people who wanted something from him: money, protection, influence, access, power, and fear. Especially fear. To the public, Luca was a wealthy Italian-American businessman with investments in restaurants, construction companies, luxury properties, and shipping. But there was another Luca Romano, the one people whispered about, the man who had inherited one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the country after his father's death, the MAFIA boss. A name that opened doors before he reached them, a name that made powerful men lower their voices, a name that ensured Luca never knew whether someone respected him or feared him. And when it came to women, the question was even worse. Did they love Luca, or did they love Romano? That night, after Vanessa left with the bracelet, Luca remained alone beside the window. His longtime advisor, Matteo Rizzi, entered quietly. She's gone? Luca nodded. With the bracelet. Matteo almost smiled. I noticed. Luca turned toward him. I want to disappear. Matteo's expression changed instantly. No, I'm not asking. Luca, for a few weeks. You can't simply disappear. Watch me. You have enemies. Exactly. Matteo stepped closer. If people discover you're alone, they won't. Where are you going? Luca picked up a plain envelope from the table. Somewhere nobody knows Luca Romano. That's nearly impossible. Then I'll become someone else. Matteo stared at him. Why? For the first time that night, Luca's voice softened. Because I need to know if anyone can look at me without seeing my money or my name. Matteo didn't answer. Luca looked back toward the city. I need to know if someone could love me if I had nothing. 4 days later, Luca Romano disappeared. No expensive watch, no tailored Italian suit, no black armored SUV, no men following 3 steps behind him. He left his phone, cards, and everything bearing the Romano name with Matteo. He took only a little cash and an old identification document prepared years earlier for emergencies. His new name was Luke Ross, and Luke Ross had nothing. Luca traveled south until the skyscrapers disappeared. Then the highways became smaller. Then the towns became quieter. Eventually, he reached Belhaven, Tennessee. Population 4,812. Nobody cared about the Romano family there. Nobody recognized his face. And nobody noticed the man sitting alone beside an old country road on a hot afternoon. His shirt was dusty. His beard had grown for several days. His expensive haircut had disappeared beneath a worn baseball cap. For the first time in 20 years, Luca Romano looked like someone the world could ignore. And people did. Cars passed. A truck slowed down, then continued. Two women walking from a nearby store looked at him and crossed to the other side of the road. Luca almost laughed. Back in Chicago, men competed for 5 minutes of his attention. Here, he was invisible. Then a faded blue pickup stopped. A young woman stepped out. She was carrying a brown paper bag. Luca watched her approach carefully. Sir? He didn't answer immediately. Are you okay? I'm fine. She looked at him. You don't look fine. Luca smiled faintly. Long day. Have you eaten? That question caught him off guard. He hadn't expected kindness, especially not this quickly. A little. She clearly didn't believe him. The woman opened her bag and removed a sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. She handed them to him. Luca stared at the food. I can't take your lunch. Sure you can. What will you eat? I'll figure it out. Why? She frowned. Why what? Why help me? She shrugged. Because you're hungry. Luca had negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He had sat across tables from men who could destroy companies with one phone call. Yet he couldn't think of anything to say. The woman smiled. I'm Emma Parker. He hesitated. Luke. Nice to meet you, Luke. Then she returned to her truck. Luca watched her drive away. He looked down at the sandwich. And for reasons he couldn't explain, that cheap sandwich meant more to him than the diamond bracelet Vanessa had carried from his apartment. That evening, Emma sat at a small wooden table across from her father. George Parker was 63, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, and permanently sunburned from decades spent working outdoors. Emma pushed vegetables around her plate. I saw a man on County Road today. George looked up. What kind of man? Homeless, I think. You think? He looked like he'd been sleeping outside. Did you help him? I gave him lunch. George nodded once, then continued eating. Emma smiled. What? Nothing. You're doing that thing. What thing? Where you're proud but pretend you're not. George laughed. Is he still out there? I don't know. George put down his fork. Go check. Emma stared at him. Right now? If he's sleeping outside, bring him here. Dad, we don't know him. George raised an eyebrow. You didn't know him when you gave him your lunch. That's different. How? Emma opened her mouth, then closed it. George smiled. Exactly. Luca was still there. He was sitting beneath a tree when the blue pickup returned. Emma lowered the window. Luke? He stood. Emma? My dad wants you to come home with us. Luca stared at her. Excuse me? We have a spare room. You don't know me. Emma smiled. My father said sometimes kindness matters more than knowing someone's name. Luca didn't move. For a man trained to distrust everyone, the offer almost frightened him. What does he want? Nothing. Everybody wants something. Emma's expression changed. Maybe that's been your experience. She opened the passenger door. But it doesn't have to be your future. The Parker house was small. 2 bedrooms upstairs, a narrow kitchen, old furniture, a porch that creaked beneath Luca's weight. George stood in the doorway when they arrived. He looked Luca over, not fearfully, not suspiciously, simply carefully. George Parker. Luke Ross. They shook hands. Luca expected questions. Where are you from? Why are you homeless? What happened? George asked none. Instead, he pointed upstairs. Bathrooms on the left. Clean towels are in the cabinet. Room at the end of the hall is yours. Luca stared at him. Why are you doing this? George looked surprised by the question. Because tonight you need a bed and I have one. That simple answer followed Luca upstairs. The bedroom was barely larger than one of the closets in his Chicago penthouse. There was an old wooden dresser, a faded quilt, one window overlooking a field. Luca sat on the bed. He had slept in villas in Sicily, private resorts, 5-star hotels, homes protected by armed guards. Yet as he listened to Emma and George laughing downstairs, Luca whispered, "This feels better than a palace." Days became a week, then two. Luca helped George repair fences. He carried boxes at the local market. He learned that Emma sold vegetables, homemade preserves, and baked goods from a small family stand. And slowly, something strange happened. Luca stopped pretending to enjoy the simple life. He actually enjoyed it. Nobody bowed when he entered a room. Nobody waited for him to speak first. Nobody called him Mr. Romano. George occasionally ordered him around. Emma laughed when he couldn't repair an old irrigation pump, and Luca loved every second of it, especially Emma. She was 29. She'd returned home 3 years earlier after her mother died, and George began struggling to manage the farm alone. She could have left. She hadn't. One afternoon, Luca was helping her unload crates when a silver Mercedes stopped beside the market. A man stepped out. Expensive shoes, designer sunglasses, confident smile. Emma's entire expression changed. "Not today, Brian." Brian Walker smiled. "I haven't said anything yet." "You don't have to." He approached her with a small jewelry box. Luca stopped unloading. "Emma!" Brian opened the box, a diamond ring. "Marry me." Emma didn't even look at the ring. "No." Brian's smile tightened. "You're still doing this?" "Doing what?" "Playing hard to get." "I'm not playing. I can give you anything." Emma glanced toward Luca without realizing it. "That's the problem, Brian. You think everything has a price." Brian followed her gaze. He noticed Luca. "Who's this?" "Luke." "Luke what?" "None of your business." Brian looked Luca up and down. Dirty jeans, old boots, cheap shirt. He laughed. "This is what you're choosing?" Emma's face hardened. "I'm not choosing between anyone." Brian stepped closer. "But if I were?" She looked directly into his eyes. "I'd choose a good man before a rich one." Luca froze. Brian laughed bitterly. "You'll regret saying that." Emma stepped toward him. "Was that a threat?" "No." Brian put the ring away. "A prediction." He returned to his Mercedes. But before getting inside, he looked back at Luca. And Luca recognized the expression immediately: jealousy, hatred, possession. He had seen it countless times. Brian drove away. Emma exhaled. "Sorry." "For what?" "Him." Luca picked up another crate. "Why don't you marry him?" Emma laughed. "Seriously? He's wealthy." "So? He could give you everything." Emma stopped. Then she looked at Luca. "Money isn't everything." Luca felt his chest tighten. "What if he could give you a mansion?" "I have a home." "Travel?" "I can travel." "Diamonds?" "I don't need diamonds." "What do you want?" Emma considered the question, then answered, "Someone genuine." Luca looked away, because suddenly those two words felt like an accusation. Someone genuine. And everything Emma knew about him was a lie. That evening, George and Luca sat on the porch playing chess. George moved his bishop. "You're distracted." "No." "You've been staring at the same piece for 3 minutes." Luca smiled. "Maybe I'm thinking." "About my daughter?" Luca nearly dropped the chess piece. George laughed. "You're not subtle." Luca leaned back. "I care about her." "I know." "Does that bother you?" George considered him. "No." Then his expression became serious. "But something else does." "What?" "You carry secrets." Luca went still. George continued. "I've lived long enough to recognize a man running from something. I'm not dangerous to Emma." "I didn't ask that." Luca looked toward the dark fields. George moved another piece. "Whatever you're hiding, son, don't wait until someone else tells her." Luca looked at him. "Sometimes telling the truth costs everything." George nodded. "Sometimes." Then he looked directly at Luca. "But a truth told too late usually costs more." Brian Walker couldn't stop thinking about the stranger. Luke Ross. Something didn't make sense. The way he stood. The way he watched people. The calmness. Brian had insulted him deliberately at the market. Most poor men would have become angry. Luke hadn't. He had simply watched. Like a man accustomed to deciding when violence happened. That bothered Brian. So he made a phone call. I need information. On who? A man calling himself Luke Ross. That's it? Find everything. 2 weeks later, Luca and Emma walked beside the river outside town. Emma took off her shoes and stepped into the shallow water. Luca laughed. What? Nothing. You're laughing at me. I've never seen someone voluntarily walk barefoot over rocks. You've lived a sheltered life, Luke Ross. Luca smiled. If only she knew. Emma splashed water toward him. He stepped back. Don't. Why? I'm warning you. She splashed him again. Luca stared at his wet shirt. Emma burst out laughing. Something inside him broke open. He ran after her. She screamed and laughed as he caught her around the waist. For several seconds, neither moved. Emma's hands rested against his chest. Their laughter disappeared. Luca. She stopped herself. Luke. His heart nearly stopped. He had almost heard his real name from her lips. She looked into his eyes. When I'm with you, everything feels easy. Luca swallowed. You've changed my life. How? You reminded me what it feels like to actually live. Emma smiled. You talk like you've been somewhere very dark. I have. Do you want to tell me? He wanted to. God, he wanted to. But Luca Romano had enemies. Names created danger. And once Emma knew his name, she would become part of his world. I will. When? Soon. Emma studied him. Promise? Luca hesitated, then nodded. I promise. She leaned closer. I think I'm falling in love with you. Every instinct Luca had developed over decades told him to remain controlled. Instead, he whispered, I'm already in love with you, and kissed her. At that exact moment, 300 miles away, a private investigator opened an encrypted file. He stared at the photograph Brian Walker had sent him, then at another photograph on his computer. Same eyes, same scar near the eyebrow, same man. The investigator immediately called Brian. I found him, Brian answered on the first ring. Who is he? There was a pause. You're going to want to sit down. Tell me. Luke Ross doesn't exist. Brian smiled. I knew it. But that's not the interesting part. Then what is? The investigator turned his computer toward a photograph taken outside an exclusive Chicago restaurant. The man in the photograph wore a black suit. 3 men surrounded him. Reporters stood behind barriers, and beneath the photograph was a name, Luca Romano. Brian's smile vanished. Who the hell is Luca Romano? The investigator lowered his voice. Officially, billionaire businessman, shipping, construction, hotels, restaurants. And unofficially? Silence. Then, Romano runs one of the most powerful mafia families in America. Brian stared at the screen. The poor stranger Emma had invited into her home was worth billions, and he wasn't just wealthy. He was feared. Brian slowly began to smile again, because Emma didn't know. Does anyone in Bellhaven know? No. Brian leaned back. Perfect. What are you going to do? Brian stared at Luca Romano's photograph. I'm going to make sure Emma Parker discovers exactly who she's fallen in love with. And back at the Parker house, unaware that his secret had already been uncovered, Luca stood outside Emma's bedroom door. He had finally decided to tell her everything, but he was already too late. Because Emma's phone had just received a message from an unknown number. A photograph appeared on the screen. Luca, black suit, bodyguards, luxury car, then a second photograph, then a headline. Emma's face slowly drained of color. At the bottom of the message were 6 words. Ask your homeless boyfriend who he really is. Emma lifted her eyes toward the door. A knock sounded. Emma? Luca's voice. I need to tell you something. She stared at the photograph, then at the door, and whispered, So do I. Luca stood outside Emma's bedroom with one hand raised toward the door. For the first time in years, Luca Romano was afraid, not of an enemy, not of a gun, not of losing money, territory, or power. He was afraid of losing one woman. Emma. Silence. Then the door opened. She stood there holding her phone. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. That frightened him even more. Who are you? Luca's stomach tightened. Emma. No. She held up the phone. On the screen was the photograph Brian had sent her. Luca Romano stepping from a black luxury SUV in Chicago, surrounded by men in dark suits. Another image showed him entering a charity gala. Another showed him beside politicians and businessmen. And then there was the headline, Luca Romano expands billion-dollar empire. Emma looked at him. Your name isn't Luke Ross. He said nothing. Is it? No. Her lips trembled. What is your name? Luca Romano. She closed her eyes. It was such a small difference. Luke. Luca. Yet suddenly it represented everything he'd hidden from her. And you're a billionaire? Yes. Emma laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Of course you are. Emma, please let me explain. Explain what? The clothes? The story? Sitting beside the road pretending you had nowhere to go? I did have nowhere I wanted to go. That's not the same thing. Her voice rose. George appeared at the end of the hallway. What's happening? Emma turned toward him. Dad, Luke doesn't exist. George looked at Luca. Luca saw the disappointment appear immediately. My name is Luca Romano. George slowly walked closer. And? Luca exhaled. I own several companies. Emma shook her head. Several companies? She turned the phone toward her father. He's worth billions. George stared at the screen, then at Luca, but Emma wasn't finished. And apparently that's not the biggest secret. Luca's face changed. Emma noticed. Tell him. Emma, tell my father what else they're saying about you. George's eyes narrowed. Luca looked at the man who had given him a bed without asking a single question. The man who had fed him, trusted him, called him son. There was no way to soften it anymore. My family has interests that don't appear on corporate records. George remained silent. Emma stared at Luca. Say it. He looked at her. The Romano family is involved in organized crime. George's expression hardened. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. You're the MAFIA boss. Luca didn't answer. He didn't need to. Emma stepped backward. My God. I never came here to hurt you. You came here lying. I came here because I wanted to disappear. You pretended to be homeless. Yes. You let me give you my food. I didn't ask you to. You let my father bring you into our house. I know. You slept under his roof while men probably would have killed to know where you were. Nobody followed me. How do you know? Because I'm very good at making sure I'm not followed. The moment the words left his mouth, Luca regretted them. Emma stared at him. Listen to yourself. He lowered his voice. I'm sorry. Was any of it real? Everything that mattered. That's not an answer. My feelings for you were real. But the man I fell in love with wasn't. Luca stepped toward her. She stepped back. That single movement hurt more than any wound he'd ever suffered. Don't. He stopped. George finally spoke. Why? Luca turned toward him. Why what? Why us? I didn't choose you. George frowned. Emma stopped for me. She gave me food. You gave me a place to sleep. Neither of you knew who I was. And you decided to keep testing us? Luca looked down. I suppose I did. George shook his head. That's the problem. I know. No, son, I don't think you do. The word son nearly broke him. George continued. We weren't taking a test. We thought we were helping a man. I never laughed at you. I never meant to humiliate you. Intent doesn't erase what happened. Emma wiped a tear from her cheek. Why did you do it? Luca looked at her and finally told her everything about Vanessa. The bracelet, the women before her, the friends who disappeared when he refused favors, the businessmen who smiled because they feared him, the people who said yes before he'd even finished asking a question. I reached a point where I didn't know if anyone in my life actually cared about me. Emma's anger softened for half a second, then returned. So you decided everyone else had to prove themselves to you. Luca went silent. She was right. I didn't see it that way. Of course you didn't. Emma looked at him through tears. You wanted someone who didn't care about your money. Yes. You found her. His eyes lifted. And then you lied to her. The words landed like a blade. Emma walked into her bedroom and closed the door. Not violently, quietly, which somehow made it worse. Luca packed before sunrise. There wasn't much. A few cheap shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, the boots George had given him. He placed everything inside the small duffel bag he'd bought in town. George was already in the kitchen. Coffee waited on the table. Luca stopped. I'll leave. George nodded. I think that's best. Luca swallowed. I owe you an apology. Yes. And more than that. George looked at him. Don't offer me money. I wasn't going to. Good. Luca sat across from him. I've had men betray me for millions of dollars. George waited. I've had people swear loyalty to me and disappear the moment it became inconvenient. Still, George said nothing. But what I did to you was worse. George raised an eyebrow. How do you figure? Because you trusted me before I gave you a reason to. Luca looked toward the stairs, and I repaid that trust with a lie. George took a sip of coffee. Now you understand. Can she ever forgive me? George sighed. That's not your decision. I love her. I believe you. Luca looked surprised. George continued, but love doesn't give you the right to decide when somebody should forgive you. Luca nodded slowly. What should I do? For a man everybody says is so powerful, you sure ask an old farmer a lot of questions. Despite everything, Luca smiled. George leaned back. If you really love my daughter, stop trying to convince her. Then what? Become the man you told her you wanted to be. Emma watched from her bedroom window as Luca walked down the driveway. A black SUV was waiting near the road. 2 men stood beside it. For the first time, she saw him as Luca Romano. One man immediately opened the rear door. Another took his bag. Luca said something. Both men stepped back. Even from the house, Emma could see the difference. Luke Ross had carried boxes at the market. Luca Romano gave orders without raising his voice. Before getting into the vehicle, he turned toward the house. Their eyes met through the upstairs window. Emma didn't move. Neither did he. Then Luca got inside. The SUV disappeared. Emma finally cried. 3 days later, Brian Walker appeared at the Parker Market. Emma saw the Mercedes and immediately turned away. Emma, leave. Come on. I said leave. Brian stepped beside the vegetable stand. I thought you'd at least thank me. For humiliating me? For saving you. She turned. Saving me? That man lied about everything. And you invaded his life because you couldn't accept that I rejected you? Brian's smile disappeared. At least I never pretended to be poor. No, you never pretended to be kind either. His jaw tightened. I still want to marry you. Emma almost laughed. You really don't understand anything, do you? I can give you the life you deserve. I already have the life I choose. You chose him. Emma stared at him. I didn't choose Luca because he was poor, and I'm not going to choose you because you're rich. Brian stepped closer. He's dangerous. Then why aren't you afraid of him? Brian didn't answer. Emma understood. Because you think he's gone. Maybe that's where he belongs. Goodbye, Brian. His face darkened. One day you're going to regret treating me like this. Emma held his gaze. The only thing I regret is not realizing sooner what kind of man you are. Brian left. But this time, something in his expression frightened her. Luca returned to Chicago. Within hours, the transformation was complete. Tailored suit, private office, security, meetings, men waiting outside doors. The Romano world swallowed him again. Matteo stood across from Luca's desk. I warned you. Luca didn't look up. That's helpful. You disappeared to discover whether someone could love you without your money. I found out. And? She could. Matteo waited. Luca finally looked at him. Then I destroyed it. Matteo sat down. Are you going back? She doesn't want me. That wasn't my question. Luca looked toward the window. I don't know. Matteo smiled faintly. I've known you 22 years. So? You've never cared whether someone wanted you somewhere. This is different. Yes. Matteo leaned forward. Because for once, you can't command the outcome. Luca gave him a cold look. Matteo shrugged. Still true. A week passed, then another. Emma heard nothing from Luca. No calls, no messages, no expensive gifts, nothing. Until one morning, George walked into the kitchen holding an envelope. No return address. Emma opened it. Inside was a single handwritten note. I won't ask you to forgive me. I won't ask you to wait. You told me you wanted someone genuine. I'm going to spend whatever time it takes becoming that man. Luca. There was no check, no diamond, no phone number. Emma folded the note and placed it in a drawer, but she didn't throw it away. The Parker market had been struggling long before Luca arrived. A poor harvest had made things worse. One afternoon, George looked over the accounts. We'll manage. Emma knew what that meant. They weren't managing. The following morning, a restaurant owner from Nashville arrived. I need weekly produce. Emma stared at the size of his order. This much? If you can handle it. We can. Then another customer came, then another. Within 2 weeks, the Parker farm had more business than they'd had in years. Emma became suspicious. She called the first restaurant. How did you hear about us? There was a pause. A recommendation. From whom? The person asked not to be named. Emma closed her eyes. Luca. The restaurant owner didn't answer. He didn't need to. That evening, Emma called Matteo using a number she'd found online. He answered cautiously. Yes? This is Emma Parker. Silence. Then, Miss Parker. Tell Luca to stop. Stop what? Sending customers. I don't know anything about Matteo. Another silence. I'll tell him. The customer stopped. Emma should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt strangely disappointed. Brian noticed the same thing. He had expected Emma to struggle after Luca left. Instead, the farm was recovering, and he knew why. He's still involved, Brian said. The private investigator sat across from him. Romano hasn't returned to Belhaven. He doesn't need to. Brian poured himself a drink. How powerful is he? The investigator hesitated. Very. Could he destroy my company? Probably. Brian's hand tightened around the glass. Could he destroy me? The investigator looked at him. Brian, my advice is to forget Emma Parker. Brian laughed. I didn't pay you for advice. You should take this one for free. Get out. The investigator left. Brian remained alone. His humiliation had become obsession. Emma had rejected him before Luca. Then she'd chosen a man she believed had nothing. Even after discovering the truth, she still wouldn't choose Brian. He couldn't accept it. If Luca wouldn't disappear from Emma's heart, Brian would make sure Luca had nothing left to return to. A month after Luca left, George was repairing equipment inside the old barn when Emma smelled smoke. At first she thought he was burning brush. Then she saw black smoke pouring from behind the barn. Dad? No answer. Dad! She ran outside. Flames were climbing one wall. George! Neighbors began running toward the property. Someone called emergency services. Emma tried to enter. A neighbor grabbed her. My father is inside. You can't go in. Dad! The roof crackled. Flames exploded through one of the windows. Emma screamed his name, then tires tore across the gravel. 3 black SUVs raced toward the farm. Doors opened. Men in dark suits jumped out. And from the first vehicle stepped Luca Romano. Emma froze. Luca? He saw the burning barn. Then her face. Where's George? Inside. Luca immediately removed his jacket. Emma grabbed his arm. No. He looked at her. He's inside? Yes, but… Luca ran toward the barn. 2 of his men followed. He turned. Stay here. Boss. I said stay here. Then Luca disappeared into the smoke. Luca. Emma tried to follow. Several people held her back. Inside, Luca could barely breathe. George. No answer. A wooden beam crashed behind him. George. Then he heard coughing. Luca moved deeper into the smoke. George was trapped beneath part of a collapsed wooden frame. Luca? I'm here. What the hell are you doing? Apparently making bad decisions again. Even George laughed weakly. Luca lifted the wood. Can you stand? I think so. Another section of the roof collapsed. George looked toward the flames. You need to leave. Not without you. Luca, you gave me a bed when I had nowhere to go. He pulled George upright. I'm not leaving you here. They moved toward the door. Outside, Emma stared at the flames. Seconds felt like minutes. Then 2 figures appeared through the smoke. Dad! Luca practically carried George out. Emma ran toward them. George collapsed onto the grass. Dad! I'm okay. She wrapped her arms around him. Then she looked at Luca. His sleeve was burned. There was blood along the side of his face. You went in there. He was struggling to breathe. Of course I did. You could have died. Luca looked at George. So could he. Emma stared at him. Everything she'd tried to convince herself she no longer felt came rushing back. Anger, pain, fear, love, especially love. Luca. He looked at her, but before either could say more, Matteo approached. Boss. Luca recognized the tone. What? Matteo held up a phone. One of the security cameras Luca had quietly paid to install on the road after leaving Bellhaven had captured a vehicle, a dark pickup. It had arrived less than 20 minutes before the fire. 2 men had gotten out. One had carried a fuel container. The license plate was visible. Luca's entire expression changed. Emma saw it happen. The gentle man who had carried her father from the fire disappeared. The mafia boss returned. Who owns the truck? Luca asked. Matteo hesitated. Company registration. Which company? Matteo looked at Emma, then back at Luca. Walker Development. Emma went pale. Walker? Luca slowly turned toward her. Brian Walker? She nodded. Matteo continued. The men driving it have worked security for him before. Luca stared at the burning barn. His jaw tightened. Emma had never seen such coldness in another human being. Luca. He looked at her. Don't. One word. He understood immediately. She knew what his world was capable of. Don't become that man because of me. Luca looked toward his men, then at the burning barn, then back at Emma. Matteo. Yes? Nobody touches Brian Walker. Matteo looked surprised. Boss? You heard me. Luca walked toward Emma. She stared at him. What are you going to do? For perhaps the first time in his life, Luca Romano chose an answer that would once have been impossible for him. Nothing that would make you afraid of me. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Luca stepped back. Emergency vehicles could already be heard approaching in the distance. He looked at George, then at Emma. I should go. She stared at him. You came all this way. Matteo called when our security system alerted him. Our security system? Luca winced. I may have had cameras installed near the property. Despite everything, Emma almost smiled. You really don't know how to stop protecting people, do you? No. He turned away. Luca. He stopped. Emma walked toward him. For 1 second, he thought she might embrace him. She didn't. but she reached for his burned hand. Her fingers closed around his. You saved my father. I love your father. George, sitting nearby, shouted, I heard that. For the first time that night, Emma laughed through her tears. Luca smiled. Then she looked into his eyes. And you could have died. So could you. What? I know you, Emma. If I hadn't gone inside, you would have? She couldn't deny it. Luca gently released her hand. Take care of him. He began walking away. Emma watched, and suddenly the thought of him leaving hurt almost as much as discovering his lie. Luca! He turned. She hesitated. There were 1,000 things she wanted to say. Instead, thank you. He nodded. Then entered the SUV. Across town, Brian Walker stood beside his office window. His phone rang. What happened? The Romano guy showed up. Brian's face changed. What? He got the old man out. You said nobody would get hurt. Nobody was supposed to be inside. Brian paced. Did anyone see you? I don't think so. You don't think so? We left fast. Brian ended the call. Then another message arrived. A photograph. 3 black SUVs outside the Parker farm. Brian stared at them. He suddenly understood the mistake he'd made. He hadn't attacked a homeless stranger. He hadn't challenged some anonymous boyfriend. He had attacked people protected by Luca Romano. And now Luca knew. That night, Luca sat inside his SUV several miles outside Bellhaven. Matteo was beside him. You want me to say it? No. I'm going to anyway. Luca sighed. Brian Walker tried to burn down a building with George Parker inside. I know. Months ago, you would have had him dragged in front of you before sunrise. I know. And now? Luca stared through the window. Emma asked me not to become that man. Matteo smiled. You're really in love. Luca looked at him. Apparently. Matteo's phone buzzed. He checked the message. Then his expression changed. What? We have another problem. What kind? The fire wasn't Brian's only move. Matteo handed Luca the phone. Documents filled the screen. Bank records, property filings, debt purchases. Luca read them. His face hardened. Brian Walker had quietly purchased the Parker Farm's outstanding debt through a holding company, and foreclosure proceedings were already being prepared. Luca looked at Matteo. When? 3 weeks ago. He wants their land? No. Matteo shook his head. He wants Emma desperate. Luca's eyes went cold. And then he'll offer to save her. Exactly. Luca stared toward the distant lights of Bellhaven. This time Brian wasn't threatening him. He was threatening Emma's home, her father, everything she'd spent years protecting. Matteo asked quietly, What do you want to do? Luca thought about George's words. Become the man you told her you wanted to be. Then he thought about Emma. Don't become that man because of me. Luca reached for the door. Where are you going? Back to the farm. Why? Luca looked at him. Because this time I'm telling Emma the truth before someone else does. Emma was sitting beside her sleeping father when she heard a knock at the hospital room door. She turned. Luca stood there. No bodyguards, no expensive jacket, just Luca. She rose. What happened? Brian isn't finished. Emma's face changed. What do you mean? Luca handed her the documents. She read them, then read them again. No. I'm sorry. He bought our debt? Through another company. Can he take the farm? He's trying. Emma looked toward her father. Tears filled her eyes. My mother is buried there. I know. I grew up there. I know. It's all we have. Luca stepped closer. I can stop him. Emma looked at him, and there it was. The question neither wanted to ask. With money? Yes. She shook her head immediately. No. Emma, no, that's exactly how this started. This is different. Is it? I'm not trying to buy you. But if you save the farm, how am I ever supposed to know? Know what? Whether I came back to you because I love you or because I owe you everything. Luca stared at her, then slowly nodded. You're right. Emma hadn't expected that. So what happens now? I help you without buying anything. How? A faint smile appeared on his face. I didn't become Luca Romano by losing every fight I couldn't solve with money. Emma almost smiled. Almost. Then Luca's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Matteo. Luca answered. What? Matteo spoke rapidly. Luca's expression changed. When? Emma watched him. What is it? Luca ended the call. For several seconds, he said nothing. Luca? He looked at her. Brian knows we discovered the debt. So? He knows his plan is falling apart. Emma's stomach tightened. And? Luca looked toward George, then back at her. Brian Walker has disappeared. Disappeared? His car was found outside town. Emma stared at him. Luca's voice dropped. And one of my men found something inside. What? Luca hesitated. A photograph of you. Emma went still. On the back, Brian had written a single sentence. If I can't have her, neither can you. And for the first time since coming to Bellhaven, Luca Romano no longer cared about hiding who he was. Because Brian wasn't trying to destroy the farm anymore. He was coming for Emma. By sunrise, Bellhaven no longer felt like the quiet little town Luca Romano had chosen, because nobody knew his name. Now everyone seemed to know it. 3 black SUVs were parked outside the Parker farmhouse. 2 men stood near the road. Another checked the property line. George, recently released from the hospital, watched all of it from the porch with a cup of coffee in his hand. This is subtle, he muttered. Emma almost smiled. Luca didn't. He had barely slept. Brian Walker had vanished, and the message found in his car had changed everything. If I can't have her, neither can you. Emma stood beside Luca near the kitchen window. I don't want armed men around my father. They're staying outside. I don't want them around me either. Emma, she turned toward him. I'm serious. So am I. You said you wouldn't become that man. And I haven't. She looked toward the men outside. This looks pretty close. Luca stepped nearer. That man would have gone after Brian the moment the barn burned. Emma said nothing. I didn't. Because I asked you not to. Yes. Then trust me now. Luca looked into her eyes. I'm trying. She gave a tired laugh. That's ironic. He accepted the blow. He deserved it. Emma immediately regretted saying it. Luca, it's okay. No, it wasn't fair. It was accurate. He walked toward the door. Emma caught his arm. Where are you going? To find Brian. Her grip tightened. No. Before you say anything, listen. Luca turned toward her. I'm not going after him to hurt him. Then what are you going to do? Make sure he can't get anywhere near you. How? The right way. Emma studied him suspiciously. You know there are normal ways to say things, right? Luca smiled faintly. I'm learning. George shouted from the porch. He's improving. Luca looked toward him. You're enjoying this too much. Absolutely. For one brief moment, the tension disappeared. Then Matteo entered. Boss. Luca immediately recognized the expression. What? We found Walker. Emma froze. Where? Matteo looked at her. An abandoned motel 20 miles north. Luca grabbed his jacket. Emma stepped in front of him. No. Emma. Don't go alone. I'm not. That's not what I mean. He understood. You want to come? I want to hear what he says. Absolutely not. Her eyes narrowed. Luca. It's dangerous. So was walking into a burning barn. Exactly. I've reached my quota for terrifying you. This is my life too. Luca stared at her. That was the problem. For years, he'd made decisions for everyone around him: what was safest, what was necessary, what was allowed. He'd come to Belhaven because he wanted something real, and real love apparently meant allowing the person beside you to make decisions you hated. He exhaled. You stay in the car. Emma shook her head. No. Emma. No. George raised his cup from the porch. She's always been like this. Luca looked at him. You could have warned me. I thought it was funny watching you discover it. The old motel had been closed for almost 8 years. Half the windows were boarded. Grass grew through cracks in the parking lot. Luca's vehicle stopped several hundred feet away. Matteo turned toward Emma. Stay close. Emma looked at Luca. I thought I was supposed to stay in the car. I lost that argument. You did. Luca almost smiled. Then movement appeared near one of the motel rooms. A man stepped outside. Brian Walker. His clothes were wrinkled. His face looked exhausted. But when he saw Emma, he smiled. I knew you'd come. Luca moved slightly in front of her. Brian laughed. There he is. Brian, Emma said. He looked past Luca. I did all of this for you. Emma stared at him. You burned my father's barn. That wasn't supposed to happen like that. You tried to take our farm. I was trying to help you. By destroying us? So you'd finally understand. His voice echoed across the abandoned parking lot. Understand what? That you belong with someone who can give you a future. Emma shook her head. You still think this is about money? Brian looked toward Luca. No, it's about him. Luca remained silent. You chose him when you thought he was nothing. Brian laughed bitterly. Then it turns out he's richer than everyone I've ever met. Emma's expression hardened. And you still learned nothing. Brian stepped closer. Luca's men immediately moved. Luca lifted one hand. They stopped. Brian noticed. Look at that. One gesture and everyone obeys. He stared at Emma. That's who he is. Emma looked at Luca. I know. Brian blinked. And you still want him? Emma didn't answer immediately. Luca didn't either. Brian smiled. See? Then Emma stepped beside Luca instead of behind him. I'm angry with him. Luca looked at her. Emma continued. He lied to me. He hurt me. He made me question everything. Brian's smile widened. Then she finished. But even after everything he did wrong, Luca learned. Brian's smile vanished. You didn't. Silence. Emma looked directly at him. He lied because he was afraid nobody could love him without money. Then she gestured toward Brian. You showed me what a man looks like when he believes money gives him the right to own someone. Brian's face twisted. I loved you. No. Emma's voice stayed calm. You wanted to win me. That hit him harder than shouting would have. He looked at Luca. This is your fault. Luca finally spoke. No. Brian turned toward him. You're the reason she rejected me. She rejected you before she knew me. Brian stepped forward. You think you're better than me? No. That answer surprised everyone. Luca continued. I've done things I'm not proud of. Emma watched him carefully. I've used fear to get obedience. I've confused power with respect, and I lied to the woman I love because I was too afraid to trust her with the truth. Brian stared at him. But there's one difference between us. What? When Emma told me no, Luca stepped closer. I listened. Brian's face went pale. Sirens could suddenly be heard in the distance. Brian turned. What did you do? Luca looked at him. Nothing. Matteo smiled. The fire investigation did. Several vehicles appeared at the end of the road. Brian backed away. No. Emma watched him. The truck was connected to your company. Those men acted alone. And the debt? Brian said nothing. The threatening message? Still nothing. The last of his confidence disappeared. He looked at Luca. You could have handled this yourself. Luca's face remained calm. Once, I would have. Brian almost laughed. What happened to you? Luca looked at Emma. Her. 3 weeks later, the Parker farm still belonged to George. Brian's attempt to seize it collapsed once his network of holding companies was exposed. The men involved in the barn fire began talking, and Brian Walker's carefully constructed public image fell apart almost overnight. But Luca never celebrated. He didn't return to Chicago immediately either. He rented a small house outside Bellhaven. When Emma found out, she stared at him. You rented a house? Yes. Why? So your father stops offering me the spare bedroom. George, standing nearby, shouted, I wasn't offering. Luca ignored him. Emma crossed her arms. You're staying? For a while. Why? He looked at her. Because you asked me once if any of it was real. Emma's expression softened. And? The answer wasn't enough. So what are you doing? Showing you. Luca started waking early again. He helped George rebuild the barn, not by sending a construction crew, by actually rebuilding it. The first morning, George handed him a hammer. Luca stared at it. You know I own a construction company. George nodded. Then this should be easy. It doesn't work like that. Today it does. Emma laughed from across the yard. Luca pointed the hammer at her. You're enjoying this. More than you know. The work took weeks. Luca's hands developed blisters. He hit his thumb twice. George mocked him both times. Emma brought lemonade. For the first time since his secret had been exposed, Luca began to feel that maybe he hadn't lost everything. But he never pushed Emma. He didn't ask if she still loved him, didn't buy jewelry, didn't make promises. He simply stayed. One evening, Emma found him alone behind the rebuilt barn. He was sitting on the fence, staring toward the fields. You've been quiet. Luca looked at her. I've learned that's safer. She smiled. Sometimes. Emma sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. Then she said, I hated you. Luca nodded. I know. For about 3 days. Only 3? Don't ruin the moment. He smiled. Emma looked toward the sunset. Then I realized I didn't hate you. What did you hate? That the person I trusted most had made me feel stupid. Luca's smile disappeared. I never thought you were stupid. I know that now. She looked at him. But you didn't trust me enough to let me choose you after knowing the truth. Luca slowly nodded. I thought if you knew who I was, you'd see the money first. And what did I see? Apparently a homeless disaster with no ability to fix irrigation pumps. Emma laughed. You were terrible. Thank you. Then she became serious. You know what's funny? What? If you'd walked into the market in one of those suits with 5 bodyguards, I probably would have hated you. Luca raised an eyebrow. That's comforting. But if you'd told me the truth after a few days, she looked down. I think I would have stayed. Luca closed his eyes briefly. That hurt. I know. No. She took his hand. That's the point. His eyes opened. You know now. Luca stared at their hands. Emma's fingers were wrapped around his. She hadn't touched him like that since before the truth came out. Emma, I need to ask you something. Anything. If you could go back. She looked directly at him. Would you still pretend to be poor? Luca thought carefully. No. Why? Because I found what I was looking for. Her eyes filled. And lost it. For a while. He looked at her. But I also learned something. What? Real love doesn't need poverty to prove it. Emma smiled through tears. And? It needs truth. She squeezed his hand. Good answer. Luca swallowed. I've been practicing. Then Emma leaned forward and kissed him. Luca froze for half a second, then kissed her back. It wasn't like their first kiss. That one had happened between 2 people who didn't know the whole truth. This one did. When they separated, Luca rested his forehead against hers. Does this mean, don't get ahead of yourself? Of course. But, Emma smiled, you can take me to dinner. Luca grinned. I know a place. She immediately pointed a finger at him. No private jet. He laughed. I wasn't going to say private jet. You were thinking it. Possibly. No armored convoy. 2 cars? 1. 3 security men? 1. 2. Luca. Fine. She laughed. And from the porch, George shouted, I can hear you negotiating. 6 months later, Luca stood in front of the mirror inside George Parker's house. Matteo adjusted his tie. This is deeply strange. Luca looked at him. What? I've watched you negotiate international deals without blinking. So? Your hands are shaking. Luca looked down. They were. Shut up. Matteo laughed. A knock sounded. George entered. His suit was old but carefully pressed. You ready? No. George smiled. Good. Good? If you weren't nervous, I'd worry. Luca looked toward the backyard. Dozens of chairs were arranged beneath strings of lights. There were flowers everywhere. No luxury hotel, no celebrity guests, no massive security presence. Emma had wanted the wedding at home, on the same farm where they'd met, where he'd lied, where he'd been forgiven, where he'd become someone different. Luca looked at George. There's something I want to say. George groaned. If you're about to get emotional, you gave me a home before you knew my name. George became quiet. Luca continued. You treated me like family when I had done nothing to deserve it. You needed help. I needed more than help. George looked at him. I needed someone to remind me I was still human. George placed a hand on Luca's shoulder. Then don't forget again. I won't. You better not. George smiled. Because now you're marrying my daughter. Luca laughed. There's the threat. Absolutely. When Emma appeared at the end of the aisle, Luca forgot everything else. She wore a simple ivory dress. Her hair fell over her shoulders. George walked beside her. Emma looked at Luca and smiled. No fear, no doubt, just recognition. This time she knew exactly who was waiting for her. Luca Romano, businessman, mafia boss, liar, protector, flawed man, the man she had chosen anyway. When George placed her hand in Luca's, he whispered, No secrets. Luca nodded. No secrets. Emma heard him. Good. The ceremony was small. At the end, Luca took Emma's hands. I spent years believing my name was the most powerful thing I possessed. Emma smiled. I learned I was wrong. What is? He looked at her. Your trust. Her eyes filled. And I'm going to protect it for the rest of my life. Emma squeezed his hands. Then I think we'll be okay. They kissed beneath the lights as everyone applauded. Even Matteo wiped at his eye. Then immediately denied it. 1 year later, an old building near downtown Bellhaven reopened. A sign hung above the entrance. The Parker house inside were temporary rooms for families who had lost their homes. A kitchen served free meals. Counselors helped people find work. Nobody paid. Emma stood beside Luca as the first families entered. You didn't name it after yourself. Luca looked offended. I've grown, she laughed. Apparently. George approached them. You know how this started, don't you? Luca looked at him. With your daughter giving lunch to a stranger. Emma shook her head. No. She looked at Luca. It started with a man who had everything convincing himself he had nothing. Luca smiled. And? And discovering that the one thing he was missing couldn't be bought. Luca wrapped an arm around her. You're going to make me sentimental. Too late. A young boy ran past them toward the dining room. His mother followed, thanking one of the volunteers. Luca watched them. Years earlier, scenes like that would have meant little to him. Now they meant everything. Emma leaned against him. Do you ever miss your old life? Luca looked surprised. I still have my old life. You know what I mean? He thought about penthouses, private planes, cars, power, rooms full of people waiting for him to speak. Then he looked at Emma, at George arguing with a volunteer about where to put a box, at the families entering the center, at the woman who had once stopped beside a road because she saw a hungry stranger. No. Emma looked up. Not even a little? There's one thing. What? The suits. She laughed. I knew it. They were excellent suits. You still have hundreds. That's not the point. She shook her head. You're impossible. And yet you married me. One of my weaker moments. Luca kissed her forehead. Then his expression softened. When I first came here, I wanted proof. Proof of what? That somebody could love me without knowing what I owned. Emma took his hand. And did you get your proof? Luca smiled. I got something better. What? A woman who knows everything about me. He looked into her eyes. And chooses me anyway. Emma leaned toward him. Don't make me regret it, Mafia boss. Luca laughed. Yes, ma'am. And for the first time in his life, Luca Romano finally understood what wealth really meant. It wasn't the money in his accounts. It wasn't the buildings carrying his name. It wasn't the power that made people obey. It was having people beside him who would have stayed even if all of it disappeared. Because money could buy comfort, power could buy obedience, fear could buy silence, but none of them could buy what Emma Parker had given him freely on the side of a dusty road: kindness, trust, and eventually, love. And sometimes the richest man in the room is simply the one who finally understands what cannot be bought. If this story touched you, tell us in the comments. Could you forgive someone you loved if you discovered they had hidden their entire identity from you? And if you enjoy emotional stories about love, secrets, betrayal, and second chances, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story.